Hi, everybody. Oh, hi, everybody. It sounds like you guys can probably hear me okay. I just want to thank everybody sincerely from the bottom of my heart for being here on just such an incredibly beautiful day. I mean, who would not rather be out there? But you are in the right place. What you're going to hear today from our practitioners and in an extended way from Dr. Debra Hendrickson, who wrote an amazing book called The Air They Breathe, and we have copies of it out there. I think will change how you see this issue incredibly. The intersection between climate and health and really equity is huge. So to begin with, I welcome everybody here. We're going to go through a series of discussions, focus first on Dr. Hendrickson, but then we'll transition to Dr. Elliott and Dr. Francine. Did I pronounce that correctly? Good. And then we'll have an extended period for Q&A. So before we begin, I'm going to introduce our new executive director who just started in July, Teresa Holmesy. She has her MPH from CMU, and she's a three-time Edward R. Murrow Award winner regionally and a previous environmental reporter for a local NPR station who has decided that she wants to take action and join MICA in terms of advocacy. She's incredibly talented. We're very grateful to have her.
All right, thank you, Lisa, for that introduction, and thank you all for showing up today, as Lisa said, during this nice weather. We'd like to also thank our partner organizations. We've got the UUCGT, the Grand Traverse Humanists, the League of Women Voters of Grand Traverse Area, and the Grand Traverse Area Citizens Climate Lobby. We wouldn't be able to do this without you, so we really appreciate that. I'm not going to take... Well-deserved applause there. I'm not going to take too much time. I just wanted to share a little bit of information about our partner organization. Oh, the organization that's hosting this, the Michigan Clinicians for Climate Action. Show of hands, how many people are y'all familiar with the org? Okay, wow, that's a lot more than I was expecting. But we kind of operate in the shadows. We're a professional association of around 450 Michigan health professionals representing a variety of fields and specialties. So we've got physicians, nurses, mental health specialists, public health officials, some registered dietitians, and many, many more. All these people are coming together because they're concerned about the public health implications of climate change, as we'll hear more. And they view electrification and decarbonization as a health solution, not just for mitigating the long-term impacts presented by climate change, but also the immediate health benefits that are presented by switching over to solar panels. So our mission is focused on promoting that message. We do education for clinicians, the general public. We've, trying to get this messaging out there by engaging with the press as well, and our lawmakers. We actually are going to be in Lansing on Tuesday meeting with our state legislators to protect the 2023 clean energy laws. So we'll see how that goes. And we're also promoting, community solar, different kinds of climate energy solutions that can help with grid reliability, but also with affordability too, and address some of the equity issues that come with decarbonization. When things are broken, we don't want to just rebuild, we want to make it better. So that's the kind of solutions that we focus on. One final thing I'd like to highlight that we do besides just education and advocacy is we've weighed in on a couple of legal issues, and that's something that takes a lot of time. We're not going to get into all of the issues right now going on in Southeast Michigan with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, but that's one area where we see the potential of utilizing health expertise to advance equitable climate solutions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa to help kind of MC. But Thank you all for being here. This programming requires support, financial support. So if you find yourself particularly moved after hearing everyone, this is a QR code to learn more and to donate. I also have a QR code out in the entrance to the same document. And if you're a health professional who'd like to get involved, you can find Lisa or I and talk to us after the event. All right.
Awesome job, Teresa. Thank you. So what I'd like to do quickly now is just to introduce our three practitioners. And we'll start with Dr. Debra Hendrickson, who, in addition to being the author of The Air They Breathe, is a board-certified pediatrician in Reno, Nevada, and an assistant clinical professor at the University of Nevada School of Medicine, where she lectures on the impact of early childhood experiences such as poverty and trauma on long-term health. She has an honors degree in environmental studies from Brown University and was an environmental analyst and planner in New England and Seattle for 10 years prior to attending medical school. So pretty cool how her environment and health career have come together. She's received many awards for academic achievement and research in both environmental studies and medicine, and she's a fellow to the American Academy of Pediatrics and a member of the Council on Environmental Health and Climate Change and a founder of the Nevada Clinicians for Climate Action. And if that sounds familiar, that's because it's our sister organization. So we're the Michigan Clinicians for Climate Action. They're the Nevada, and there are 30 of us affiliated to a larger professional society that's national. Most importantly, Debra is a mom of 3 children and unusually influential and insightful climate advocate who grounds her work in our shared love of our children and grandchildren. And I think you'll feel that in spades, and we are so glad to have you here. So thank you, Debra. I also want to introduce Dr. Mark Elliott, who many of you may know. He's a retired cardiologist and an alumnus of the University of Michigan Medical School. He retired recently as a cardiologist after practicing 30 years here in our own town at Munson Center. He spent his career treating cardiovascular disease and addressing risk factors. And so he notes more recently, we have come to recognize that climate change and its causes are significant risks for cardiovascular disease. So he's going to take us into some of those insights. He's also very active in the Grand Traverse Humanists and advocates for a life philosophy at the intersection of science and ethics. And then we're lucky enough to have Dr. Lisa Francine. She's an ecotherapist and a scholar of deep ecology and a licensed clinical psychologist. She has helped to build more resilient communities for almost 35 years, guiding individuals and groups in psychotherapy, weekend retreats, it sounds great, wilderness solos, workshops, and almost anywhere in the natural world. She likes to think of herself as an activist for the soul, as well as an environmental and social, as well as an activist for environmental and social justice issues, and how they are interconnected and contribute to the climate emergency. She earned her PhD in 1996 at the University of Montana and eco-psychology extended coursework through Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado. She currently lives, we're lucky enough that she lives in Traverse City with her 2 cats and enjoys out of doors as much as possible. So I'm going to stop here and pass it over to you, Debra, to go from there. I think your first slide is right there. Is that right? That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's better. So yeah, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Lisa and Teresa. They've done so much work to set up my tour of Michigan here, and it's been so wonderful. We've met so many great people. And I've mentioned at other gatherings, it's been many years since I've been in Michigan, and it's just so wonderful to see your beautiful state again. And what a gorgeous day to meet all of you. As they said, Lisa said, I'm here to talk today about the impact of climate change on children's health and to touch upon some of the major themes and ideas that I tried to convey in my book. And this is what the book looks like. Somebody was asking me about getting copies. There are little cards out there with a picture on it if you want to take the name of it. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about the photo in my title slide. It was taken in Santa Rosa, California, in a neighborhood called Coffee Park that was completely destroyed by the Tubbs fire in 2017, if any of you remember that. This was one of the places I went when writing my book. I went down there right after the fire. And I met a 5-year-old there who had had to flee in the middle of the night with her mom and brother, and they barely escaped with their lives as the neighborhood burned down around them. You know, when a fire strikes these residential areas, everybody's trying to get out on the same 2-lane road. So they were stuck in traffic watching their house and all their friends' houses burn down. And you try to imagine what that's like when you're 5 years old. And if you've read my book, you know that it's organized around stories like that of babies and children across the country who've been adversely affected by climate-fueled or climate-triggered events. And I tried to fold the science of the health issues that are associated with the warming world into stories of real children so that the science is easily digestible and readable, hopefully, almost so you don't even realize how much of it you're absorbing. But also to tap into the love and fierce protectiveness that we feel for our kids and hopefully motivate us all to act. So I want to tell you a little bit about how the project of writing the book began. I tell this story at the beginning of chapter 1. As you just heard, I live in Reno, Nevada, which happens to be the fastest warming city in the United States. So it's not the hottest city in the country. That would be places like Phoenix and Las Vegas and Miami, but it is the place where temperatures are rising the fastest. We've had more than 7 degrees Fahrenheit rise in average annual temperature since the 1970s, which is more than twice the amount of warming you've had here in Michigan, just to compare. So we're seeing more heat waves, of course, and other impacts, but the biggest impact we've experienced by far is wildfire smoke. And this story happened during the Yosemite Rim Fire of 2013, so a little over a decade ago. And we all know now, though we didn't know it at the time, that it was the first in a series of catastrophic smoke crises that would strike the area where I live over the coming decade. And I was in my clinic that day, and outside the window, ash was falling like snow, and every so often a big gust of wind would come along and it would swirl around the building like ghosts. So it was this apocalyptic scene outside. And this baby was brought into my clinic. She was 10 months old, and I call her Anna in the book. And she was coughing and wheezing, and her mom had brought her in her baby carrier covered with a damp baby blanket to try to protect her from the smoke. And she looked up at me with these big brown eyes, and her mom said, isn't it funny how you never think about breathing until you can't? And before becoming a pediatrician, as Lisa said, I'd been an environmental analyst and planner, and I'd gone to graduate school in forestry, actually. So climate change and the effect it was going to have on Western forests had been a part of my education. I had this unusual background for a pediatrician, and it was this moment that brought my past and current career together. And I was just really stricken looking at this baby struggling to breathe. I thought, this is climate change. It was the first time I'd really seen the impacts in one of my patients. And this was a little before the media had really caught on to the health impacts of climate change. So there wasn't a lot of talk about it. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to zoom out from this moment in my clinic, this little baby in just one pediatric clinic in a small city in the West, to these global processes that had triggered this chain of events that led to her coming in that day, but to also to zoom in to what was happening in the microscopic structures of her body. So zooming out, how is Anna's story tied to the global crisis of climate change? Well, ever since the dawn of the industrial age, when we first started burning coal for power, we've been pulling carbon from beneath the earth and pumping it into the atmosphere in the form of emissions from fossil fuels. This is a graph that shows the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, that's the red line, and the average surface temperature of Earth for the past 2,000 years, which is the period, of course, in which modern civilization has developed. And you can see that they parallel one another because CO2 prevents the sun's energy from escaping back into space. It traps heat near the planet's surface. And you can also see that we're living through unprecedented times. Our bodies and our civilization evolved in a certain set of conditions, this atmosphere and this climate, that are now rapidly changing. You can see how steep those curves are at the end of the graph. And this has huge repercussions for our health. And this leads me to one of the major themes I wanted to express, which is that what's happening is a crime against the world's children, because the most powerful and profitable industry in history chose to unload the cost of their business, current and future air pollution, onto the least powerful. The photo here, this is someone named James Black. He was an Exxon scientist who's going to appear in the passage I'm about to read. And this graph is very famous in climate circles. If you've read The Road Not Taken about Exxon's early decisions about this, this graph was produced in the 1970s, and they predicted almost to a tenth of a degree where we are right now. They knew exactly what was going to happen. So this is a passage about this. It's in my clinic, and I was taking care of a 16-year-old girl who had come in for her well check. And I asked her, just routinely, like, well, what are you thinking about doing when you grow up? And she said she was thinking about becoming a teacher. And I was like, oh, that's great. And then she kind of stopped me and said, well, it's because I don't know, I just finished this project on climate change at the university, and I'm not sure if I want to bring kids into a world like that, but she wanted to work with children. So this scene follows that. And there's a reference in here to pinning a towel to her shoulders and kryptonite. And that's because I use the Superman story as a metaphor in this part of the book. So I set down the girl's chart and handed her a tissue. In the hallway, my medical assistant asked, which ear hurts, buddy, as the next exam room door shut. We sat for a moment, then I asked if her mother, also in the hallway, knew how she felt. She wiped her nose and stared at the Kleenex in her hands. I don't like to say anything, she said, because she just gets this look on her face. What kind of look? She shrugged, like she's scared and sad. So you don't want to worry her? She shook her head no. It's our job to worry about you, I thought, but didn't say, because what defense would there be if that were spoken? I wanted to pin a towel to her shoulders and tell her she could save the earth. I wanted her to understand that despair was like kryptonite in the hands of powerful men, a weapon wielded to get their way. I wanted her to feel some of what I felt welling in my throat. Because our warming world is not just a health and existential threat, it is the greatest moral crisis humanity has ever faced. This young girl was not the victim of an accident. All the children alive today, and all who will ever live, were chosen to bear this burden by the men who ruled the world. Those men led the industry that had laid our path to this moment years ago. Their decisions were now here in my exam room. In 1977, when I was about this girl's age, Exxon scientist James F. Black realized that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was rising and the planet was warming due to the burning of fossil fuels. He presented a startling warning to the company. Within decades, continued use of its products would radically alter the earth. The Exxon executives who heard his report were alarmed. They funded millions of dollars of research, all confirming his ominous findings. But by 1988, when NASA scientist James Hansen told Congress the same thing, the heads of the largest oil and gas companies had made a choice. And that choice would shape the future of billions of people, living and unborn. Their minutes and memos did not mention my patient. They never thought about the life of one young girl in my clinic, but I thought of them now as I sat with her. Powerful people we would never meet, deciding her fate. Men who risked the world and made a child pay their debt. And this leads me to one of the other major themes I wanted to express. Because which is at the same time that this, is happening. This is in some ways the best of times ever to be a child and the best of times ever in pediatric medicine. So it's created this incredibly ironic period in medicine. Because of all the advances in pediatric care and all the advances in public health, like vaccines, water treatment, sewage treatment, mosquito control programs, pasteurizing milk, we've improved child survival really dramatically around the world. At the beginning of the 20th century, which was not really that long ago, in 1900, a newborn born in pretty much anywhere in the world had only a 50-50 chance of making it to the age of 15. And it's much better, survival everywhere in the world now. But at the same time, we've got this immense threat to civilization and our health rising in the background. And this could undermine a lot of these achievements of the past. It's worth remembering that high infant survival is not humanity's natural state. And if extreme weather starts to undo our infrastructure, we could backtrack. But just health is significantly affected in other ways I haven't shown here. Allergies are increasing, infectious diseases like Lyme, which I know you guys are seeing in Michigan because of the ticks spreading northward, famine and drought in some places of the world, and mental health impacts, of course, which we're going to be talking about. I'm going to focus today on children affected by these three big types of extreme weather. And one of the reasons I think the fossil fuel industry has gotten away with not really having to face the consequences of what they've done is that these changes are not creating whole new categories of either disaster or health problems. They're just turning up the dial on things we've always known. These events are getting more extreme and affecting many more families as temperatures rise. Of course, this is creating hazards for everyone, but I think children are uniquely vulnerable. And I say in the book that this is a crisis first and foremost for children. First of all, they're going to inherit the world we create, of course. They're already being disproportionately harmed, which I go into a lot of detail in the book. Those less than 5 years old are most at risk. There was one study that showed that when you take into account the life years affected, more than 90% of the global disease burden of climate change is falling on those under 5 years old. Children have a different physiology. In pediatrics, we often say that children are not just small adults. That's just because their bodies work differently in ways that make them more prone to environmental hazards. They're smaller, so they get a bigger dose of hazards, like whether it's pollution or heat. Their behavior, immaturity, and dependence on adults creates risks for them. But maybe most important is that their organs and systems are still forming and growing. And this last point is especially important because children's bodies and minds develop through interaction with the world. And I should be clear that even if air pollution from fossil fuels were not causing the earth to warm, it's a significant threat to children's health and development even without that. Because the lungs and brain literally form through interaction with the air they breathe, which is partly where the title came from. Lung development is badly affected by air pollution, as is the brain, which also forms through a child's experiences and relationships. And this brings up one of the most important ideas I want to convey, which is that children's bodies and all of our bodies are inextricably linked to the atmosphere. Every time we take a breath, every time we drink water, we're pulling the atmosphere into our bodies. And every cell of the body contains oxygen and water. We literally carry the atmosphere within us, yet never think about it. And we're sitting here in this invisible sea of gas right now, that we just don't think about every day. So I'm going to read one more excerpt, and this is another one-pager from the book. And just to set it up, this is from the introduction, and it's after the Carr and Mendocino complex fires had left us covered in smoke for weeks. And shortly after that, the city of Paradise had burned down in California, and that is just west of Reno. So we had a lot of refugees basically coming into the city to stay with family members. And shortly after that, the air cleared, and I was walking from my clinic into the hospital to see kids in the pediatric ward. And you have to pass through this glass passageway at my hospital between the office building and the hospital. And as you do that, there's a garden down below. And I looked down and I saw a little boy who I just finished seeing in the clinic. And he was with his mother and younger brother. And it was starting to rain, and he was trying to catch a raindrop on his tongue. So I used that scene to explain how his body and physiology were connected to everything else in the scene. That the atoms and molecules of water that are swirling around him might have flowed through him and many other living things around the world. Which meant that these elements were only borrowed from the atmosphere, not owned. That as he played, the breath he exhaled and the moisture evaporating from his skin, mouth, and lungs were rising back into the clouds to be carried away by the wind. That the water in the urine he voided that night before being tucked into bed would find its way, eventually, back to the sea. Because the water and air and heat that swirl around the globe, in clouds and rivers and oceans and wind, also flow through us and every living thing. The atmosphere outside the windows of the clinic and hospital, the backdrop to my patients' visits, is part of their bodies, physically linking them to this planet and all its life. Children are creatures of this world. What we do to the earth, we do to them. But children are attached to their world by more than water and air. When my young patient finally caught a raindrop, he threw his fists in the air and ran to his mother, who was sitting on a nearby bench. She smiled and hugged him, and he went limp with mock exhaustion, knowing she would not let him fall. The baby then squealed at being left out and waddled toward them like a tiny drunk. The older boy turned, crouched down, and tenderly hugged his brother, who had collapsed into his arms. "It's okay," I could see him saying. "It's okay." For a moment, they were in a line, the mother's hands on her son's shoulders, him embracing his brother. Who could doubt, looking at them, that love passes through generations as surely as genes, linking us to everyone who came before and everyone who will follow. Who could doubt what science now proves and what I tell an audience of medical students every year when I lecture about early childhood? That the love we show our children, like the water they drink and the air they breathe, becomes part of their bodies, literally shaping their brains and hearts and futures. That same love, I hope, will save us, because it is the fiercest love that human beings feel, and no healthy parent, if they see their child is in danger, does nothing. So I want to tell you the story of another of my patients that's related to the issue of how the developing body is linked to the quality of the environment and some of the questions that his case raised. This is what my city normally looks like. We're about 10 miles from the California border. Those are the Sierra Nevada mountains with Lake Tahoe just over the other side of them. But during the Carr and Mendocino complex fires in Northern California, the air looked like this. And these two are taken from roughly the same spot. And a 4-year-old patient of mine, who I call Liam in the book, snuck out of his house because the kids, it's very hard for toddlers and little kids to stay in the house week after week of this. We've had up to 10 weeks of this kind of air at times. It's been better the last couple of years, but yeah, there have been some really terrible years we've had. And so he got, sick of being in the house and snuck outside and was out for a few minutes before his mom found him and ended up hospitalized the next day because of the effect on his lungs. But what was interesting about him, he'd also been exposed in utero to wildfire smoke during the Rim fire in 2013. And remember, that's the fire that Anna came in 2013. So his mom had been in the first trimester of pregnancy with him during that fire. And then he'd been exposed repeatedly throughout the years in between. And so one of the questions with him was, he had many conditions or diagnoses that are associated with prenatal and early life exposure to particulate pollution, which is the main pollution in wildfire smoke. He was born prematurely. He had a congenital heart and urinary tract defect that have both been associated in research with in utero exposure to particulates. He had a speech and developmental delay in ADHD, which, we know now that particulates can invade the brain through the nose of small children. It gets into the frontal part of the brain, but it causes inflammation of the brain during development in mom and in early childhood. He had very severe reaction to smoke exposure requiring hospitalization, which may have been related to prematurity. He'd not had any problems before, or it might have been related to problems with how the lungs were affected by exposure. But this case is also a good example of how difficult it is to pin any of this on climate change, because we can never look at one patient, even though he had all these symptoms that we know are tied to exposure. We can never say that that's what happened in his case. We can only really know on a population-based level. If we look at the whole community over time, we're going to see certain diagnoses rising because of the exposure to these pollutants. But we are unable to look at any one patient because these things can happen for other reasons and say that climate change is the reason. And that's what makes it difficult. And I think that's another reason that the fossil fuel industry has gotten away without having to be accountable for these kind of things. But it is, these are all things that are associated with early in utero and early life exposure to smoke and particulate pollution. I went to Phoenix, Arizona as well, and to talk about heat and study heat, because Phoenix, of course, has always been a hot city, but it's also one of the fastest warming cities in the country. And I don't know if you've been following the news the last few years, but they had 70 days over 110 a couple years ago. They had 30 straight days over 110, and these are really unprecedented. And in the book, I compared them to a boy who had moved to Phoenix at the turn of this prior century and how many days he was exposed to versus how many days kids are being exposed to now. And young children are at risk because of their small size. Just like a small room heats up faster than a big room, a baby is going to heat up much faster than an adult. But they also have a physiology that makes them more they don't have some of the tools that we have in our bodies to adjust to hot weather, and so they're more prone to getting a heat illness. But adolescents are also at risk for different reasons. They can cope pretty well physiologically with heat, but their judgment can be off. They don't always recognize that they're getting sick from the heat. And they also produce more metabolic heat than adults typically. So I told the story of two boys, a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old, who both collapsed with heat stroke while hiking in Phoenix in extreme heat a year apart from one another. And this is the trail that Cody hiked in Phoenix. I hiked both the trails that these boys went on, and when you read the chapter, this is the trail they had to rush up to bring him down. Both these boys had suffered exertional heat stroke, which is the kind of heat stroke you get while exercising in hot water. And so they were packed in ice, intubated, given cooled IV fluids, and then transferred by helicopter to Phoenix Children's Hospital. The speed with which the boys were treated determined the outcome of their two cases. And I use that as kind of a metaphor for the tragedy of climate change, because like heat stroke, a lot of what we're facing was preventable. And now it's the speed with which we react to it that is critical. One final theme I wanted to talk about, this is my last reading from the book, is that, as we're going through all this, children are having their own experiences of the warming world, but their experiences are largely invisible. The youngest children, of course, really don't have the vocabulary, the language to describe what they're going through, to put labels on what they're feeling. So I went down to Houston and I interviewed another 5-year-old whose home was literally torn apart in Hurricane Harvey. And much like the little girl in the Tubbs fire, they had to flee in the middle of the night. His parents and his 1-year-old twin siblings and their dog, they stayed in the house until it was, rising too high for them to wade through. They picked up the kids, went out to the driveway. The car was filled up with water. They had a 1-story house, but their neighbors across the cul-de-sac had a 2-story house, so they were trying to get there so they could go to the 2nd story. And they were clinging to a fence that was at the end of the cul-de-sac. And the neighbor boys, a couple of teenage boys, saw them, came out and helped them, clinging to this fence as the water's rushing into the cul-de-sac to get to the other house. And they went up to the 2nd floor. After they got there, the dad came back out. This is referenced in the passage, that's why I want to explain it. He's over 6 feet tall, and there was debris piling up against the fence, and he went out to try to clear it because it was causing the water to back up even further. So he was outside, and mom and the kids were on the 2nd story of the neighbor's house. And this is the next morning. And this is a photo of them actually being evacuated. So Lucas heard the motorboat before he saw it. It tilted hard to one side as it turned the corner into the cul-de-sac. The 3 men sitting on its benches wore helmets and bright yellow jackets. "Over here," his mom yelled. Daddy turned from the fence in the neck-deep water and started waving his arms over his head. The men pulled up to the roof like it was a dock. One of them climbed to the window and handed bulky orange life vests to his mom, and she put them on Lucas and herself. "What about the twins?" she asked. "Sorry," he said, "none of their life vests were small enough for babies," and this is a common problem in these disasters. Mommy stared at the man for a second, then climbed out the window onto the roof. She sat down and reached back for Lucas. He looked at her outstretched arms. Behind her, across the water, was the top of his house. "Why do we have to go?" His neighbor bent down and said there was no food or anything to drink or diapers. "Your mom has to get you somewhere safer," she said. The roof felt rough through his pajamas and on his palms. He held Mommy's hand and worked his way down slowly so he wouldn't slip, until one of the men reached up and lifted him into the boat. Then Mommy passed the crying babies one by one to these men he had never seen before. Last, she tried to coax their dog, Max, out. No, the men said Max would have to stay. They needed room for another person trapped in an attic nearby. Lucas started to cry. Max would be scared. He might try to swim after them and get lost. Daddy yelled, "I'll find another way out. Get them out of here." The men were in a hurry, so Mommy grabbed Max and scooted down with him to the boat. They left Daddy behind in the deep water, alone. Lucas turned around and watched him standing by the fence until the boat turned out of the cul-de-sac. The boat's outdoor motor echoed off the neighbors' houses as they went down the street, now a strange bayou of floating roofs. The boat's wake splashed against windows. They saw other neighbors on rooftops. The men said, "We'll be back. Hang on." Mommy held the twins tight, but they were quiet now, and so was Max. Everyone just stared at the brown water block after block. When they passed the elementary school, Lucas saw its playground equipment sticking up like a wrecked boat. He remembered the story about Noah's flood, which God had sent to punish bad people. Maybe I did something wrong, he thought. And I wanted to tell you the story of after the book came out in the summer of 2024, in January 2025, I was in Los Angeles because my granddaughter was born in January of 2024, and it was her 1-year birthday. So I was in LA when the fires were going. And this is a Landsat photo that was taken after the fires, and these kind of rusty looking areas that ring this part of the city are the places that burned. Is this a pointer too? So this is the Palisades area. This is, blanking on it. Gosh, I'm just reading it. But anyway, this is the Altadena. Thank you. I blanked on it. This is Altadena. And then there was a small fire here. And you can see there were other breakout fires in other places. And that red dot is where my granddaughter and my son and daughter-in-law live. So I volunteered for a group called Extreme Weather Survivors during the fires and was helping parents answer questions about what their kids had been exposed to in the smoke and what kind of risk they were at. But it was just a reminder of how close to home these disasters are getting, especially for folks in certain parts of the country. And I added an afterword to the paperback version of the book about this experience. It was also just a few weeks before Trump was elected, of course. So there was a lot to say in the afterword. But I know this is all kind of grim, but I always want to end on the message that, there's a lot of urgency. Like I said, the speed with which we react is critical right now. We must cut CO2 emissions in half by 2030 to avoid going over 1.5 degrees warming with no or limited overshoot. That was the calculation that was made, about 8 years ago. And of course, it's looking now like we're going to cross that threshold. And so the question is now is how far over are we going to cross? Because, 1.6 is better than 1.7 is better than 1.8. So it's still critical to do all we can to try to keep it from going too high. We also have agency to do something about these problems. Analyses have shown that rapid decarbonization is technologically feasible. All the barriers are political and psychological. And I put the picture of the Titanic here because the problem wasn't that they saw the iceberg, they reacted too late, to turn away from disaster. And that's a good metaphor for this, I think. I think parents and grandparents, all of us have to fight together for the possible world, not just for our kids, but also for ourselves, because action is the antidote to despair. It lifts you out of feeling like there's nothing you can do. So I'm urging everyone I talk to, take action in your own life in whatever way you can. These are the major sources of carbon emissions in our own life. And I have handouts that summarize this, so I won't go through reading this all now. There's a lot we can do about each of these. And this is just a photo from my own house of things I've done over the last 10 years, electric car, an induction stove, a heat pump, an electric water heater. In Nevada, Michigan has the same program, but I guess it's more expensive here than it is in Nevada. I signed up to get all my energy from renewables for $2.50 a month. So all of this now is powered by sun, wind, and geothermal power. And I don't have any gas appliances anymore in my home. And it may seem like nothing, right? But the average passenger car emits 4.6 metric tons of CO2 annually. Gas appliances in one home emit somewhere between 2.5 and 4.5 metric tons of CO2 annually. So just say I'm on the low end of that, that's 7 metric tons of carbon dioxide annually that I've hopefully eliminated, from my own life. If 10 people everywhere I talk do that, that's 70 to 90. And if we do that for 10 years, that's 700 to 900. And every pound of carbon we keep out of the atmosphere matters now to the future we're leaving kids. But we also need to take action in our communities through policies and through fighting for ways to support these kind of interventions in our homes and communities. So we need to fight for clean energy and sustainable practices at city councils, county commissions, public utility commissions. A lot of people don't think about them, but they have a lot of say over what happens on this issue. And some of their hearings are kind of arcane and detailed, but they make very important decisions about what kind of energy people are going to be using in your town. School boards, are your schools switching to electric school buses? Even if there weren't climate change, diesel school buses have been tied in multiple studies to a lot of respiratory problems in children. There's lots of reasons to switch. State legislatures, since the federal government has really abandoned the fight on this, the fight now is at the state and local level, and we have to really focus there. But also, join groups that are following these topics, like MICA, the Michigan Clinicians for Climate Action, Citizens Climate Lobby, Moms Clean Air Force is specifically parents and grandparents who fight for clean air and against climate change. There's the Michigan Climate Action Network and Planet Detroit, out of Detroit, and I'm sure there are more. And before finishing, I just wanted to remind you of this slide, if you haven't seen it before, from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the UN group, of course, of scientists that study climate change. They remind us that every action matters, every bit of warming matters, every year matters, every choice matters. Nothing is too small. Start somewhere, do one thing if it's only one thing, and then move on to another if you can. But everybody needs to try to do something about this. And I want to close with this drawing from Shawnee, who was the 5-year-old that I described meeting in the opening slide. I spent an afternoon with her and her family at the park playing, and when we were done, she asked if I wanted to see a drawing she'd done. She pulled it out of her mom's purse and unrolled it and showed it to me. And she told me that this at the bottom, this part is the fire when everything was burning and it was really scary. And this is how everything was then. She said everything is like this now. But the rainbow and flowers that at the top, that's what the future is going to be. And I hope all of us can leave here today motivated to fight for the future that she dreams of and all children dream of and deserve. Thank you.
Know about you guys, but I'm fighting back tears. And I want to pass it off. I have a prepared question, but I think I'll just pass it on to Dr. Elliott and have him talk to us about cardiovascular disease and fossil fuel pollution. So take it away.
Test. Oh, yeah. You're coming through. Okay, great. Again, most of you know me. I'm Mark Elliott. And first, I'd like to thank Dr. DeBuono and Micah for inviting me to this panel and allowing to help discuss the effects of climate change on health. I'm going to focus primarily on environmental pollution and cardiovascular disease or cardiovascular health. And these are several of the different environmental stressors and environmental pollutants that all affect cardiovascular disease. And Dr. Hendrickson already was talking about climate change. I'm going to focus on air pollution, which, as you know, is the primary driver of climate change. Like this? Okay. Does that sound okay? Okay. Well, air pollution is such a problem because it causes or worsens so many diseases. It's estimated that air pollution kills 9 to 13 million people per year worldwide. And that would make it, depending on the metrics that you use, that would make it the second leading cause of death in the world today, second only to hypertension. And almost 30% of all the deaths due to heart disease, due to heart attacks and strokes, can be attributed to air pollution. Air pollution also causes diabetes and hypertension, which are significant risk factors for cardiovascular disease. And it also causes non-cardiac diseases, as Dr. Henderson was talking about, lung disease, cancer, kidney disease, and both acute and chronic exposure increase your cardiovascular risk. So if you're exposed temporarily, like you have to be downwind from a forest fire, and I mean up to 1,000 miles downwind of a forest fire, like the Canadian fires that affected us, that increases your cardiovascular risk with increased risk of heart attack, stroke, acutely, and even a small increase in mortality risk. Or if you live in a city, an industrial city, and you're exposed chronically, that's a lot worse even. Well, these are the three main pollutants that cause cardiovascular disease. PM2.5, and PM2.5 is and nitrogen dioxide and ozone, but PM2.5 is fine particulate matter that's suspended in the atmosphere, and it's up to 2.5 microns in size, which is about 1/3 the size of a human red blood cell. The prevalence of these different pollutants depends on where you live. Do you live near a highway? I mean, for every 100 meters you move away from a highway, your relative cardiovascular risk drops 6%. But do you live in a city or the country? What country do you live in? Do you heat your house with wood or gas? And like so many people in the third world, do you cook over a charcoal stove? 99% of the world's population, including us in Traverse City, live in areas that exceed the WHO safe level for PM 2.5. And I can address our local levels in the discussion. And don't worry, take a deep breath. Traverse City is not that bad, actually. It's just on the borderline. And actually, we're quite fortunate. PM 2.5 and nitrogen dioxide are products of combustion, and they come from burning of fossil fuels, with the primary sources being car exhaust, industry, and power plants. But there are others as well. And ozone. Ozone is great if it's in the stratosphere and it's protecting us from the sun's radiation, ultraviolet radiation, but at ground level, where we live, it's harmful to both plant and animal life. And it's not released directly by industry. It's formed in a chemical reaction of sunlight and air pollutants that we release into the atmosphere. So how does air pollution cause cardiovascular disease? Well, the mechanism for air pollution and heart disease is complex, and it involves multiple pathways. But basically, fine particulate matter gets breathed deep into the lungs where it can enter the bloodstream. It also affects the lungs, which are distressed, and they release chemical signals into the blood. And all of these things result in systemic inflammation, epithelial dysfunction that causes high blood pressure. There's stress hormone release like cortisol. There's oxidative stress, increased blood clotting. And all of these things together promote atherosclerosis. And atherosclerosis is the gradual buildup of plaques and blockages in arteries, and that's cardiovascular disease. And cardiovascular disease leads to heart attacks, strokes, cardiac arrhythmias, and for some unfortunate people, even death. So that's basically a whirlwind thumbnail sketch of air pollution and cardiovascular disease. We know so much more than we used to in the last decade or two. So in the discussion, I can drill down deeper into the science or into some of the things we can do about it. Thank you very much.
That was really a terrific discussion. Thanks so much, Dr. Elliott. And you know, one of the sayings that we and Mike always say is that climate solutions are health solutions. And one of the big parts of thinking about that is in regards to air pollution. When we contrast air pollution versus greenhouse gas emissions, air pollution tends to be very local, and as opposed to greenhouse gases, it does drop out of the sky much more quickly. So if we transition away from fossil fuels as an energy source or towards electrification, as we've been talking about, we should see improvements of air pollution relatively quickly. And those populations that have been disproportionately impacted will see the best benefits. And that's one of the key things to thinking about climate solutions are health solutions. We would realize huge life savings and healthcare savings. We would see huge savings in terms of preventing deaths and avoiding hundreds of billions of dollars really every year here in the US if we made this transition. Now, we've heard a little bit about how all of this is impacting our mental health, especially of young people. So I'm happy to introduce Dr. Francine to talk a little bit about this intersection of our mental health and maybe spiritual health and environmental health. So thanks.
Well, since I only have 5 minutes, I hope I do this in 5 minutes. I decided to skip the slides because I just really wanted to have a conversation with you. And instead of slides, I thought I would bring this little guy to remind us that it isn't just about the humans, because everything we're learning about our health, lungs, brains, everything is also happening to the non-human world. Yeah, I don't fight back tears. I just let them roll. I've been blowing my nose over here. So Dr. Hendrickson's book is fabulous. It is a must read. I met several of you are in my book club here, and we will be reading this in our book club. It's just so important. And one of the chapters she didn't mention so much was how the natural disasters are causing PTSD in our young children, along with a lot of other mental health problems. So it is all connected. And so I thought I would just start real quick, take a couple steps back and define for you what is ecopsychology. I moved here in 2004 from out west, Colorado and Montana. Told people, yeah, I'm an ecopsychologist. And no one looked at me and went, oh, that's great to hear. More is like, what is that? So I'm going to just read you a definition because it's not so easy to explain. It's more of a philosophy. This is adapted from Dr. Sarah Kahn. Ecology is the study of connection of the interrelationships among all forms of life in the physical environment. Psychology is the study of the human psyche as it perceives, feels, thinks, imagines, and acts. So ecopsychology is bringing together psychology and ecology to study the human psyche within the larger systems of which it's a part. Out of this, ecopsychology is now a more specific emphasis on climate psychology, looking specifically at two things: the mental health impacts from the climate emergency and the mental health processes contributing to it. So just as Dr. Hendrickson mentioned, we know how to address and bring down carbon. You know, we have the ways. It's just that we don't have the political will as of yet. And our own psyches, even those of us in this room who I'm assuming most of us believe in climate change in here, maybe not, that our psyches do get in the way as a way of self-protection. So I'll get into that in just a bit. So the practice of ecopsychology and deep ecology is based on the recognition that the needs of the earth and the needs of the human individual are one and the same. They're interdependent. The health of the planet is the health of the human. They're the same thing, actually. We used to talk about the mind and the body. And it was like, oh, wait a minute, they're actually connected. Let's talk about the mind-body connection. Well, actually, they're not just connected, they're the same thing, right? It's called the nervous system, and everything is connected. So same with us in this natural world and with all of our non-human friends, all the living beings. So we define sanity as if the whole world matters, because it does. The solution is not to pathologize the reaction that we are having to climate change. So this is really important. We need to see this as a normal, healthy response. The fear, the grief, the anxiety, all of it is a normal, healthy response when our home is being destroyed, because it is, right? So we need to name the emotions and normalize them, not fix them and try to make them go away. So anytime I'm trying to help somebody who is really struggling with their feelings around this, is to normalize and validate and share that I am right there with them. That alone can just take so much pressure off. Like, what's wrong with me? How come I'm the only one? So we have developed quite a new vocabulary to better define the emotions related to the climate catastrophe. Eco-anxiety, I think a lot of people have heard that now. Chronic fear, fatalism, anger, and exhaustion. There's eco-guilt, that my actions are going to lead to the death or suffering of others presently or in the future. It's also, I know, I definitely have this constant, like, I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing enough, right? Ecological grief, grieving the loss of beauty, of places that we've known and loved, of species going extinct. I'm sure many of you experience like somewhere that you have visited out of doors, you love it, you go back to see it years later, and it's a strip mall. There is a loss. It's like losing our own arm, right? We're going to feel that. So anticipatory grief, grieving what will be lost and what we're imagining will be lost. And I think our movies, the post-apocalyptic, I can never say that very easily, definitely give us visuals for that. It's not very beautiful. Also, pre-traumatic stress disorder, grieving the future in the present. Things like insomnia, stress, intrusive thoughts of trauma to come. And all of these are definitely things that our young people, children are experiencing, as well as us. And then there is the post-traumatic stress disorder that's so well written about in Dr. Hendrickson's book. I can say about the PTSD, after Hurricane Katrina, the suicide rate there tripled. In 2018, because of heat waves and drought, 10,000 farmers in the country of India committed suicide. And even here in Michigan, the farmer suicide rate is 5 times higher than in the general population. And of course, you know, oh, well, that's not because of climate change, it's because of whatever. It's all connected. That's you'll hear me say that a lot. Yeah, well, it's all connected. So those are some of the new words that we're using to better define the reactions that we're having. So then the other piece of this that I wanted to mention right now, I think a lot of us can feel so frustrated with those who are still in, we say, denial of climate change. No thanks to the fossil fuel industry. I often will ask myself the question for all of us, though, is how is it we go on day after day like business as usual? It freaks me out sometimes. And especially I think with this new, the political climate, there's a lot of talk about that because it's happening in the immediate, but it's like, now we're really not talking about climate change. That's kind of what I've noticed. And so how is it? Like, what is it in our psyches that allow us to go on day to day without, like losing sleep all the time or freaking out? So climate psychologists are talking now about 2 kinds of denial. So the first one is the one that we're more familiar with, which they actually call negating. Okay, so denial is not ignorance. Denial is you actually do know something and then you're doing something with what you know. So negating is repudiating whatever it is you know is not true. Okay, I think that's a pretty small percentage anymore. I wish I had that on the top of my head. I don't. I say don't worry about them. There are enough of the rest of us who aren't negating to make a bigger impact, say, than we are. So that's the other piece. The other kind of denial is called disavowal. So when something is known, but it's treated as unimportant or disregarded. How can we, for example, fly in a plane knowing how much carbon it's releasing into the air? And yet most of us still fly. We all drove here today, right? It's like, and it's, of course, I know, it's like, well, how do you get places? That's how our culture is. We live in a car culture. But there's all sorts of defense mechanisms that we use, compartmentalizing. Like, I know that, but I can't do anything right now, so I'm going to put it here. Then we just don't tend to get back to it, right? Or, well, it's up to the industries. So disavowal, I think, is worth all of us, like, are we really doing what we can? Even, and this is, I'd like to end on this, and then we'll get to our panel discussion. Even if all the action we take doesn't make a difference, at least you can go to bed at night knowing that you are showing up in a way that might make a difference, could make a difference, or at least you're being the kind of person that you want to be, who would be someone who would at least try. Right. And we are showing our kids at the same time that we are trying to do what we can. It gives us a sense of agency. So I will stop with that. There's always lots more to go over, including like, how do we talk to our kids about climate change? Should we talk to them? What's the best ways? But we'll let you ask the questions. So thank you so much.
That was really awesome. And now we're going to bring people up so that people have a chance to ask questions. And we were going to have people write down the questions, but if you guys promise to not go on in the question and genuinely ask questions, we're going to just try to, for the sake of expedition, have people pose them. I want to also emphasize that we will transition after questions in about 10 to 15 minutes because I want to end on real concrete actions, and we have people from the League of Women Voters here who are going to help us think about one real important action. And so I'm going to open the floor for people who want to pose some questions.
Hi, thank you so much for all of your information. It's very informative and very necessary. So I have a question about wildfire smoke and what other biological agents are coming in that smoke. If you have any updates on that, or if you know anything about different funguses or viruses that are also coming in that smoke.
Well, most of them, the main impact we've seen, I think, is allergens actually that are liberated by the smoke into the atmosphere, and so we see a big spike in allergies. I know there has been research tying some other pathogens, but I don't know if I've seen that clinically or not. Have you read something about that, or yeah? Oh, fungus, yeah, there is some concern about that. Like, but also it turns out heavy metals. The contents of wildfire consist of mainly particulates, heavy metals, and toxic chemicals that all swirl around. And the proportion of each varies depending on what's burning. So like in the LA fires or the Tubbs fire where you're burning an urban area, you see a lot of heavy metals and toxic chemicals. But it turns out even in wilderness areas, you can get high levels of heavy metals. It depends on the geography of what's being burnt under the forest. And that's the same thing with the fungus. It depends on the soils and what's there and how well it survives the intensity of the fire. Because a lot of the fires are getting much hotter, but there have been reports that fungus has been liberated by some of the fires. So then it's
I wanted to add real quickly. I'm not sure if that's working. Oh, okay, the only thing I wanted to add, which is pertinent a little bit here, is that ground level ozone also tends to increase after wildfire smoke, and it can extend for a long distance. And there are areas within our state in which our regulatory bodies, EGLE, are discounting high ozone days and calling them exceptional event days because of wildfire smoke. And the EPA actually allows for that. But what that's doing is it's saying, we at this stage, we can't control wildfire smoke. In the big picture, if we address climate change, it should eventually reduce. But for now, we're not going to be able to control that, but there are things that they can do that would reduce ozone in terms of automotive regulations and in terms of addressing industry that does pollute, that could reduce the baseline ozone so that when there is wildfire smoke, it's not peaking above that level. But they're choosing not to do that. Instead, they're calling them exceptional event days. And that's some of the litigation that Micah has tried to enter into and make comments in terms of at EGLE.
I don't know if any of you saw that this part of Michigan is under a wildfire alert right now. Yeah, so.
So I think thinking about our children's future is a wonderful way to try to address climate change. And I have had to pick kids up at our schools in the last couple of years, and hundreds of cars and buses are idling. How could we get actual scientific information about the quality of the air our children are breathing as they're trying to leave and arrive at school?
Yeah, there's no idling. I don't know. There are no idling programs. We have a no idling program going on in Nevada right now where we're trying to educate parents and the school administrators about this and put up signs and try to get them to not idle while they're waiting for the kids. It's tough in a place like Las Vegas, which is so hot and, you know, in certain parts of the year as you're getting into summer or early fall when the kids come back. So that's one of the issues we have to weigh against that is keeping the cars cool enough that people aren't endangered by that. But yeah, idling cars. And of course, when we switch to electric vehicles, that problem will disappear. But for the time being, trying to have no idling zones around schools. I don't know if any of you have followed what's happened in Paris around schools, but the city of Paris has reduced its air pollution 40% in the last 10 years through a series of interventions. And one of the big projects that the mayor had was these school zones. And I met her in New York last fall, which was a highlight of my life. She was just so great and talking about how she every day thought about how does this help children? Are we doing for the children of Paris as we go forward? And they basically made the schools no access zones for cars. And I don't know how they managed the traffic, but they planted trees instead. And so these families had to walk through a tree zone to get to the school, and they started interacting more with one another. And the community and the ratings for these things were, sky high. And the mayor who just won, she was mayor for years, and then the guy who just replaced her was promising to continue the promotion of these programs. So there's a range of opportunities to kind of reduce the problem here.
And then I would just add, this is one that I started years ago with 350.org and CCL. We talked a lot about trying to empower our students to do no idling campaigns. And now they have local air monitors. It would be so cool for us to write a grant to get into the schools and let them actually test the air in different places. That would probably energize people. And every time we get students involved, the parents get involved. And some of our best climate advocates who are sitting in the back got activated by their son, right? So I'd love for us to think about that. And then how can we bring the stories that Dr. Hendrickson has said and make them more aware, our parents more aware of it. Most everybody here, I know you guys know about this, but let's figure out how we can bring it to our community. Let's be an example. I think we could do it.
Not to get too into the weeds, but they sell these purple air monitors, and you could set them up outside the school and make it a goal for the school to get those monitors down to a certain level, and encourage post the results every week, something like that. Yeah.
Yes, I'm a little conflicted to ask this question because I love our airport and I love flying out of our airport. Yeah. But the airport is expanding, getting a lot more flights. Does anybody know what the impact is to our air quality? And what and after they add all of these extra flights, what the expected impact is expected to be then?
I'm not aware of specific studies in that regard, but the air quality in Traverse City is for PM 2.5 is 6. So it's just above the level. And in the summers, during the forest fire seasons, it can go up to 30 to 80, depending on how many forests or how many fires and things like that are there. And I think a lot of it has to do with population density. I mean, as you have more cars, more buildings, more industry, you end up with more pollution. So is the Traverse City Airport going to contribute to pollution? Yes. And why do we need an airport? Because there's so many people. So that's just part of the problem. I mean, we have to reduce the amount of things we burn, fossil fuels. But so much of that fossil fuel burning is is necessary for human activity like food, housing, and transportation. But we can do those things smartly and use less.
Aviation is a stubborn problem. It's probably going to be the last industry that we really solve. But there's a lot of work being done on alternative fuels and on electrification of aviation eventually. But right now, yeah, it's a problem. Sure.
And I just want to bring in one other air pollution problem here. And I love that you asked that question. And I think it's a really pertinent one. But I want to tell a really quick story about a woman that I worked with who had really brittle asthma. And she worked at nighttime so she wouldn't be exposed to different volatile chemicals that would cause her to, develop asthma. She was on prednisone a lot, and she had finally gotten her asthma under control. And then the Blue Angels came to town, and it was Cherry Festival, so all the boats came and all the cars came, and she was out there. She calls me one day and she said, "Oh, I love the Blue Angels. I'm sitting on top of the top of the parking structure, and I'm watching them, and it's so cool." And heat increases ground level ozone as well. Yeah. And probably within 4 or 5 hours, she was back needing her inhaler, back on her asthma meds, her prednisone, etc. So air pollution changes really quickly. And what happens locally, like people coming in, just as you described, Mark, makes a huge difference. So I would guess that the airports are going to have an impact. Study during COVID.
Oh, there was. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's true.
Yeah.
Right. And that's often used as an example of, this is what the world would look like. None of us alive today have ever lived in a world without air pollution. So we just sort of accept it, but it doesn't have to be this way. And COVID really made that clear. Really, yeah.
Actually, one of the things Deb said to me as we were driving up here is maybe we'd be better as climate advocates if we could help create that image in people's minds and say, this could be what we give our children. We could give that to our children, a world in which there wasn't air pollution like this. We can do that. I mean, the science is there. It's cheaper. It's easier to deploy. We can do it.
Exactly. Yeah, because I think it is important because, I think climate discourse tends to be very, creates a lot of despair, right? Because there's this gloomy future. But I think it's very important not to just focus on what we're trying to avoid, but this better future we could build. Like we're on the cusp of this amazing world where cars don't pollute, where trucks don't pollute, where maybe airplanes don't pollute someday. And we're going to see illnesses, a lot of illnesses drop if that happens because of all the effects of air pollution. So I think having that image in your mind, and Paris is a good example of this, what kind of cities could we have and how could that address multiple different things going on in society, like improving human contact with one another, neighbors contacting neighbors, and just people getting out and exercising and walking more because they're not using their cars, in various ways we design our cities. So anyway, I think it is important to focus on that positive vision as well.
I have 2 more questions.
Yeah, first, thank you all for speaking out. This is great. I have a question for Dr. Francine I have a lot of grandkids of all ages, and I'm just curious what your thoughts about best ages to talk about, how to talk about it.
Pull out my trusty notes here. Thank you for asking. I was hoping someone would. Yeah, even as young as 3 or 4, that sounds unusually young. The thing with the younger the child, just the less you say. Often if they bring it up, that's the best time to talk about it. And you just say a little bit, And it's like if you have to talk about divorce, or when the day comes and you're going to talk about sex, all the hard, challenging things to talk about kids with, often best to wait until they ask us and then use that, because obviously then we know they're thinking about it. What is important though is that we do talk about it with our kids. I think I sense people are afraid to talk about it. They don't know what to say, or they just want to, protect Johnny from something that awful. So let's just not talk about it. There was a study with 10,000 youth ages 16 to 25 from 10 different countries. And they found from that study, 75% of kids think the future is frightening. I didn't think that growing up. Did anyone else here? Right? Frightening, right? More and more young people are deciding not to bring children into the world themselves. Why would you want to do that when there's not going to be a planet left? 8 out of 10 youth think adults have failed to take care of the planet. 48% feel dismissed or ignored when they try to talk about the climate crisis with adults. And this happens in schools, it happens at home with mom and dad. It's like, how would you feel if you're a young child and you say to your mom, Mom, we're sawing the log that we're sitting on, Mom, and you're just getting ignored, right? That's basically, so our children will face the changes they're going to be facing by watching us face the changes that are already occurring right now. Are we talking about it? Thinking aloud? Are we thinking critically about it? Are we expressing our feelings about it, like grief and fear and frustration? Are we showing some confidence in our ability to take some steps and do something about it? It's important to model calm concern, right? We want to connect on a feeling level, over the facts, right? Because that's what actually helps build resilience. Other things that help to build resilience in our kids: get them outdoors, get them off their phones, connect with nature. That way they will care about nature, and their minds and bodies hopefully will be healthier, depending on the level of pollution, now that I'm much more aware of that. We want to make all feelings okay, and help them name their feelings. Young kids as well as adolescents are actually really amenable to meditation. And there's a wonderful format class called mindfulness-based stress reduction that helps people learn to just slow down and pause and breathe and not be so reactionary, to build a pause in between, hearing something they don't like and responding. I think that kind of skill right there, I wish they could teach that in schools, because we all need that. We can model that for our kids, but also teaching them that. And also teaching our kids how to be uncomfortable. We are creatures of comfort, no doubt. Oh, I'm kind of chilly. Up goes the thermostat a couple degrees, right? But life isn't only about being comfortable. So we can teach our kids also to you don't get everything you want. Here's how to stay with something that's uncomfortable. It's not going to kill you. Okay, so you don't like it, but it's not going to kill you. All of those skills also help for a hotter planet and things that are going to get more difficult. So, yeah.
Yes, I'm not going to refer to the extremists on either side, because I think there's no convincing them of anything. But for the people who are in the middle, the polarized middle, how can we talk to them about this, or what can we do to help them come to grips with their denial and with the reality of climate change?
I guess I'll start. Well, in the clinic, I deal with people from a across the spectrum from, very conservative ranchers from the Great Basin Desert to very wealthy families who've moved up to Lake Tahoe from the Bay Area to immigrants who take care of the casinos. So big spread. And so I do have quite a few patients who don't believe in what's happening, but we have had so many crises where everybody who came in, there was no avoiding the topic. It had to come up. So, but I think the most effective way to deal with people who may not really understand what's going on or agree with it, I agree that if they're really diehard, have drawn a line in the sand, I don't believe this at all, there isn't much point in engaging with them, and I have to worry about maintaining a relationship with these folks because I do care about them. So I never push on, hard on them, but I usually will ask questions like, well, if they say something about the smoke or what's going on or how hot it is, what do you think is going on? Or something they've noticed with the changes in the forest, I'll say, what do you think that's about? And I hang pamphlets on the back of the door of the exam room about decarbonizing your home and switching to induction stoves, things like that. They can pick up and ask me about if they're interested. If they don't bring anything up and they don't say anything, I don't always, bring it up. I usually look for openings, and usually in the spring or summer, when we're heading into these seasons, when we start to see problems, I tell them, hey, it's getting hotter. You need to watch out for these things. It's going to be smokier. You need to watch out for those. People who really get resistant and hostile, I just, but that's partly because of the role I'm in, But often I find, asking questions is a better thing than making statements. And if there's any part of what they say that you can agree with and validate, that can be really useful too. Like all of these events have a lot of complex issues going on. Like the fires in California, part of the issue was the buildup of fuel from the suppression of lightning fires for so many years. And so a lot of the more conservative folks will make comments about, well, this is because we're suffering this way because of bad forest management. And I'll say, forest management is part of the problem. You're 100% right. But I don't know if you know, but there's been over 100 studies showing that climate change is drying out these fuels and And California is spending $2 billion to address that part of the problem. But the rest of us have to, worry about the rest of it. So anyway, if you can find some area of commonality, that's a way to connect and ask questions instead of making statements.
I would agree that being in our roles as professionals, we can only go so far. I think, I'll have clients come in and it's like, I would love to talk about that, but that's not why they're in my office. So have to respect the reason that they're there. But when it comes to our friends and family, that's kind of a whole nother story and what we can hopefully get away with talking about. I think just to even start is just to keep bringing it up. Just keep throwing the word out there. Because it, like I was saying earlier, it's just easy for our minds to not think about it. We got a lot of other things on our minds. So, or for example, like the war in Iran, one of the silver linings of this might be to be able to share with friends, and you get excited and they don't have to reply, but you're still getting the information out. I think NPR talked about this, but that one of the effects of that, one of the silver linings, is countries all over the world are saying, oh my God, we are so dependent on fossil fuels. We have got to today get back to wind and solar and really take this seriously. And that just reminds me, another way to talk to our friends and family is actions that we may be taking that's actually saving us money. Talk to them about how much money they could save. They may not care, if it makes a difference for the climate, but if they have more money in their pocket, that's going to make a difference too. So whatever people can, whatever motivates us.
And if you look at what China has done in the past 20 years, I mean, they went through a massive industrialization period, and they suffered severe pollution problems. I mean, in Beijing in the 80s and 90s, and it was horrible there. And but they recognized it as a health problem, and over the past 20 years, they've taken some serious steps to reduce their dependence on coal, especially, but on fossil fuels in general. And even their cars, and their pollution indices have come down significantly. And you contrast that with India, which hasn't been able to make those changes. And I mean, their agriculture is still, they burn all the fields at the end of the year, and all that particulate matter ends up in New Delhi, and their pollution indices are terrible there. But so China was able to do it, and actually America has actually improved significantly since the 1970s as well. But there's a lot more we can do, and we still face a lot of the problems that we need to fix.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, focusing on health with, health and cost. And also, I think a lot of conservative folks that I take care of in the clinic, they like the idea of being kind of off the grid, being independent and powering their own house and not importing the energy that we have so much of in Nevada, because we're a very sunny, windy state with a lot of geothermal energy. So there's a lot of ideas that I think are appealing about the transition that are appealing to folks who are more conservative. And so sometimes you can connect up with that. And just love of the area. Like everybody loves to go up to Lake Tahoe and fish and camp, and we can see the forest burning, and, just not losing the things that we all care about regardless of party. So if you can connect on those things.
Amazing discussion. I think there may be more questions afterwards. I know that they're going to kick us out and want us out by 5 o'clock. So I did want to just touch briefly on some solutions if I can find it. And if our people from the League of Women Voters want to kind of move up here, and I can't advance the slides. Any ideas? Oh, there it goes. Okay. So I just wanted to think briefly about what do we do from here? What is our role right now, given how broken our system is? And our system is really broken. But I think a lot of the points that were made right here, the rest of the world, even though our country is moving backwards, the reason why our air pollution has improved so much was because of the Clean Air Act and the work of the EPA, and this current administration is unrolling that and has actually rescinded the endangerment finding, which is a finding that says that the EPA can regulate on greenhouse gas emissions. They have taken that away. They have decided that they are not going to factor in healthcare cost in their rulemaking going forwards. They're literally reversing the mandate of the EPA that said that we were supposed to care for humans above profit. So we are in a broken phase. The rest of the world is still moving in the right direction. No question that the closure of the Straits of Hormuz is making a huge difference, and clean forms of energy are cheaper, they're easy to deploy, and they improve human health. So I would suggest that we take a moment and hold in our mind the incredibly powerful and heartfelt stories told here today, and then using our most robust moral imagination, allow those stories to really envision that world that actually could be, and use that to motivate us to move forward. Climate solutions are health solutions. That's true for literally everything. And I'm not going to run through each of these, but walking, eating less meat, don't idle, all of those things are good for us, but we need policies in place that make the easy choice, the healthy choice, and the environmentally friendly choice. We need those policies. We need, for our individual actions really matter, and they set tremendously great examples, but we also need collective action. Putting our own masks on were important in COVID, but if other people weren't being vaccinated or doing that, then we were still facing a tremendous health problem. So I think we can't ignore that we need to elect politicians who value human health and well-being over corporate profit, and who make decisions based on reality-based data not falsehoods. And the American Medical Association says that voting is a social determinant of health. And so let's do what we can to get out the vote, and let's turn it to the experts who know how to do that.
Before you go, could I just add one more resource that I failed to mention today? So there is also online, whoever's interested, a fabulous resource out of England. It's called the Climate Psychology Alliance.org. ClimatePsychologyAlliance.org. It has youth support, parent support, teacher support, clinician support. There's actually online groups. There is podcasts and research articles, and I mean, you name it. It's quite a fun rabbit hole to go down. You can find almost anything you need there to address more of the psychological aspects of this crisis too. So, thank you. Yeah, ClimatePsychologyAlliance.org.
Okay, hi, I'm Charlotte Nesbitt. I'm the co-chair of the League of Women Voters for Grand Traverse Area, along with Charlene Krieger. Thank you for inviting us to this wonderful presentation, and thank you for writing your book. Really appreciate you bringing attention to that. I'm here to talk about voting. Keeping voting open to all U.S. citizens without unnecessarily blocking the ability to vote has been the League of Women Voters' focus for 106 years, continually staying nonpartisan. We want future generations to have the right to vote without regard to special documentations to obtain a voter registration. Our secure, multi-layered oversight within the election system in Michigan holds a very high standard. We ask if you have any questions, always feel free to ask your clerks. They have the answers, and if they don't, they will get them for you. Our websites, we have two websites, the League of Women Voters US, which is lwvus.org. They have lots of information about voting, lots of information about what's happening in the world, things that you should be taking actions on. You can trust them because they have done their homework. They actually attend all of the meetings through congressional meetings, etc. They're doing their homework. And then we also have our local League of Women Voters Grand Traverse Area. They have on our website a number of sections where you can look at voter services, voter resources. The one thing that I want to point out is we have Vote 411. It is an amazing website. It just will give you everything you need to know about voting. So if you're concerned about who's on a ballot, what's on a ballot, is my registration valid, has my ballot been accepted, was it there? They've got it all. There's other websites out there that do similar, but not as intense as Vote 411. And it's national. So if you've got your kids in Oregon saying, I don't have a place to go, tell them, vote411.org, and that's what you're going to find. We have a couple of brochures out there that are really interesting. We've got our Try brochure, which is it's about all of your representatives here, your clerks, your mayors, your council. It has their email address and their phone number for you to get a hold of them if you need to. Please, if you don't have one, pick it up. Also, we have our fact-checking brochure out there that tells you how to look at dis and misinformation, to know how to look at things and make sure that you're actually giving out good information. The last thing we have, and it's just relatively new, it's just a sheet. It's about all the House bills in regards to the SAVE Act. So you can actually go on the back, it's got QR codes, go up there and look at it and you'll see what's going on and be able to follow them. There's a number of ballot proposals out there being offered on our next ballot, but documented proof of citizenship is, I think, the most important for us to pay attention to. And because of this threat to our voting process, we ask that you stay informed, check your voter registration, follow your ballot, and most importantly, vote. Thank you.
Did you bring buttons? Okay. And we have buttons that have a QR code on them that if somebody says, I don't know if I'm registered, the QR will allow them to check if they're registered, and they can register right there on their phone. So I think we have them with us, and you're welcome to take one if you want. So again, big thank you so much to all of our panelists and to all of our sponsors. And don't be dismayed by the brokenness of the world. All things break, but really importantly, all things are mended. And not with time, as they say, but with intention. So go love intentionally, extravagantly, unconditionally, because we have a broken world right now, and it's waiting for each one of us right now, the light that's each one of us. So let's go do it. Thanks. Thanks so much for coming.